Okay, so welcome. We're still in Siman Lamed Aleph, and Sarah, you're going to take it away with seif Dalet.
Okay, so my job is pretty easy because Josh did such a beautiful job last week. But we dipped into the tour at the end of last year, I thought we'd start with Shulchan Aruch, because these two seifim are pretty connected, and then kind of back up into the Gemara. We will do what Rav Nachum just said we shouldn't do, which is revisit the Gemara that Josh did, but we will revisit it. Hopefully, it will be more useful revisiting given that it's been a week in the interim. And also there's a sort of little extra bit that tacked on that becomes important for the main kind of questions I want to focus on. So can I get someone to read Daled in the Shulchan Aruch? Joel, you've been nominated.
So I'm only here at the beginning. Why not? All right. We're in Lamed Aleph, right? Yeah. Okay. Hadi Amrinan, Hihi Mekudeshet Misafek, Shema Davar Zeh Shave Pruta B'Makom Acher, Tzricha Get Lehitira LeAlma. All right. So the fact that we said that, there's if you use something that's less than a pruta and to get married, and that she's Mekudeshet from Safek, right? Because maybe there's some in Madai or wherever it is, there's this thing is worth a pruta, right? Therefore, you need a get in order for her to be married to anybody else, right? To be open to the shuk, essentially.
Does anyone remember who the opinion is that we're concerned that the thing might be worth Shaveh Pruta and Madai? Who is that associated with? Right, that's Shmuel and the Gemara. So we'll see.
Yeah. So, okay. V'imrod selakaima tzricha kiddushin acherim. All right, but if she wants to stay married to the first person, right? So Reuven married her with less than a pruta, or did kiddushin with less than a pruta, and if she wants to marry Shmuel, she's got to get a get from Reuven. If she wants to stay married to Reuven, she's got to do kiddushin all over again with Reuven. So, okay. Where was it? Ve'im kidsha acher kiddushin gemarim. So that now Shmuel comes along and does real kiddushin with her after she's safek mekudeshet to Reuven. Yegaresh rishon v'noseh sheni. Then she has to divorce Reuven but marry Shmuel, or she can marry Shmuel. I don't know if she has to, but maybe she might have to here. But okay.
Well, it seems like there's a chashash that she's married to. She's really married to the second guy.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, that she may have to be married to him, I guess. Yeah. So you're right. So that she has to then go back and do kiddushin with the second person, because maybe she actually is married to them in the first place. So, but interesting side note of would you do Birkut Erusin again or not? Is it a Levatala the second time? But I think it's an interesting question. Maybe other people don't. So, but okay. And to finish it up, vinoseshini aval lo yigareshini v'isa rishon. But what you can't do is now go divorce Shmuel and marry Reuven. Reuven, the one who did the safek kiddushin in the first place, right?
Great.
Good. Should I keep going with the Haggah, or you want to
keep going with Haggah? Because
okay.
That's actually keep going with Haggah.
Why?
Really in the last line.
All right, go ahead.
I was wondering if someone was going to ask the question.
Why? Can you explain that last din?
I think it's because of what people are going to say, isn't it? That Reuven divorced her. She got married to Shimon, and now Reuven's taking her back, which is asur deraita to do.
Right.
And so, because of that appearance, we don't allow it to happen.
That was my understanding as well. Yeah.
So. Okay, I think it says that maybe in the Beit Shmuel or Chokat Mechokek as well. Okay.
I think Beit Shmuel definitely says it. I don't remember.
Okay. Okay, the Beit Shmuel says it?
I think so.
All right, V'davka shelo ba'aleh, this is the Haggah, Davka shelo ba'aleh hashini kodem gerushin. All right, and this is the case where she doesn't have sex with the second one before the divorce from the first guy. From the second guy, sorry. Right? Aval ba'aleh harei nesra l'rishon. But of course, right, if Shmuel does have sex with her, whether or not, she now is asura to Reuven, period, right? That's right. The end of the story. All right. Ukashem she'asura leval, kach asura leboel. And where we have a principle, just as she's now forbidden to Reuven, she's now also forbidden to the person who came in the middle, essentially. So to Shmuel. So both of them are kind of out. Not kind of, they are out. So, all right, that's the Haggah. V'yeshomrim she'im yalda misheni v'lo giresh rishon havlad kasher. But there's an opinion who says, I don't remember in the Be'er Haggadah, is in the name of the Ramah, I guess, that if she has a child from the second person, from Shimon, right, and never divorced Reuven, still the Vlad is a there's no mamzer there. It's a kosher child that can be yavo b'kahal. So
right. So that last this din of the Ramah that gets quoted as the Yeshomrim, I think is one of the things I want to focus on, because when I first read it, I thought this doesn't make any sense at all. It seems like either nothing has happened or something has happened, and if something has happened, then the child should be a mamzer, and there should be no sort of way around it. So one question I want to try to answer is what's a kind of good reading of why the Ramah thinks that, and how can we kind of make sense of it in light of what goes on in the Gemara? So that's actually sort of the piece that I want to focus on, in part because Josh did such a beautiful job doing some of the first half of this seif, but also I think because it raises some interesting questions about what do we do with sveikot, what kinds of options are available to us in these cases where things are, this is a high stakes question. This matters a lot for the people involved. What kinds of options are available even when it seems like kind of on first reading, there's nothing much we can really do here. It seems like at least for the Ramah with a hey, there is some way out. Okay, comments, questions, thoughts before we move on. Yeah, just talk.
I actually see a logic to saying there's no mamzerut, because the first nisuim was a besafek anyway, and I think one of the goals often of the halacha and of the poskei halacha is to try to minimize mamzerut wherever you can. And if you have a nisuim that was besafek anyway, and not vadai, then that sort of opens the door to say, okay, we're not going to call this one a mamzer.
Good. So I think that's definitely the way this goes. If you remember from last week and you hold you read the Rambam the way the Tur wants to read the Rambam as saying there's a D'oraita level problem here, then you might not be willing to kind of go that far. So whatever, we'll see this played out as we go. So I think now the move is to look back at the Gemara. We saw we can sort of go through quickly the initial part of the Gemara. I'm going to share my screen with you if that's possible. Yes, it is. Great. Everybody see the right thing? Something that says, okay, great. So you can also follow along in your real Vilna Shas if you want. To the very bottom of Yud Bet. The first little chunk is what we did with Josh, but then there's a kind of further discussion of a particular case, which is obviously going to be important for what we want to discuss. So can I get someone to read? Otherwise, I'm going to make Joel read more. Yavni, go ahead.
From Amar Shmuel?
Yeah.
Amar Shmuel קידשה בהתמרה, אפילו, רגע. קידשה בתמרה, אפילו עומד קור תמרים בדינר מקודשת, חיישינן שמא שווה פרוטה, במדי, והאננתנן, so that was, yeah, we already know that, והאננתנן בית הלל אומרים בפרוטה ובשווה פרוטה. לא, והאננתנן בבית הלל אומרים בפרוטה ובשווה פרוטה. לא קשיא בקידושי ודאי, בקידושי ספק. ההוא גברא דאקדש באבנה. Wait, sorry, yeah, we already know all that, right? We don't need to.
Yeah, that should be a review from last week. Should be fairly straightforward, yeah.
ההוא גברא דאקדש באבנה דכולך יתב רב חיסתא וקא משער לי אי יתבע שווה פרוטה אין ואי לא לא ואי ליתבע שווה פרוטה לא והאמר שמואל חיישינן רב חיסדא לא סבר לדשמואל.
Okay, so just can you just stop there for a second and translate?
Oh, sure. So there was a person who did kiddushin with this cheap blue stone, and Rav Chisda said, get it evaluated, and if it's worth a pruta, yes, and if it's not worth a pruta, no. And the Gemara asks, and if it's not worth a pruta, the kiddushin didn't happen, but didn't Shmuel say that we're chayshinan, we're concerned about this? And the answer is, well, Rav Chisda didn't agree with Shmuel.
And just spell out what the this is quickly.
Sorry, which this? The
like, what is it that's right? What is it that when we say
that we're worried?
Chayshinan what?
Chayshinan, we're worried that it's worth a pruta somewhere else, presumably.
Great.
Yeah. אמרה להם אימי וההוא יומא דקדשה הווה בה שווה פרוטה, אמר לה לאו, כל כמינך דאסרת לה אבטרה.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
So she said to him, what is ime?
Right. So the mother is essentially standing on the side. Right? She sees what's going on, and so she says, I know that on that day it was worth Shavei Pruta. So you, Rav Chisda, don't need to go and evaluate the thing. I at that time I knew how much it was worth.
Right. And so he said to her, yeah, I don't know.
Lav kol kaminach. It's not in your power to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't intervene in this way. So then we might have a lot of questions, which we're not going to answer now, about like, why is that? Is it that she's a woman? Is it that she is, sort of, she's too close? Is there something else going on? Whatever. That's like a whole set of questions that we're basically not going to talk about right now. But the important thing that we get out of this, which is going to lead into sort of where the meat of the conversation is just there is this incident with Rav Chisda and the stone, and there's a possible witness who's then rejected as someone who could testify to its value on that day. That's what we got. Questions, comments? Okay. Yeah, Yavni, you want to keep reading?
Sure. אמרי לרבנן לרב חיסדא, אמאי האיכא סהדי בעידית דידעי דבהוא יומא הווה בשווה פרוטה, השתא מילה ליטענהו כמן. I'm going to need some help with some of this.
Okay.
So
give it a shot. Start.
The Chachamim said to Rav Chisda, yeah, why don't you go ahead? Someone else can take over.
So now we someone else want to take over besides me? Anyone? Any takers? No takers? Okay. All right. So first we had the mother coming in and yeah, Josh, go ahead.
Right. Just that I prepared this earlier. So the rabbis say to Rav Chisda, but what about there might be these witnesses in Idit or Irit or Orit, depending on your manuscript, who know that on that, whether it was worth a pruta on that day or not.
Great. So instead of the mother, we have some other person who might be in some faraway place, and they could come and testify. Yeah. Therefore, thereby resolving any question about.
It's not clear if they definitely exist. There's just a chashash they exist, I think. But what are the rabbis saying? They're saying, when they say ha'ika, are they saying there are witnesses, or?
I think they're saying there might be. There might come
right.
to be witnesses.
Right, there might be witnesses. And then he says to them.
You're saying like there are people who could testify to that.
Yeah. Even if they're far away.
Yeah. Okay, so ha'ika, it's not a question. Ha'ika. And then he says back to them, but they're not here to stand in front of me. Hashtamiha lalitnehu, come on. Now they're not here to bring it before us.
Right. So I'm not going to rely on the theoretical possibility that there might be someone far away who could resolve this question because they're not here. So there's a way in which this is a kind of extension of the of Shmuel's initial thought of oh, what if there's some place far away where this is worth Shavei Pruta? What if there's a witness far away who could testify that this was worth Shavei Pruta? But then eventually the Rabbanan are going to say, no, that doesn't work because they're not here. All right, great.
Is this called a safek when there are witnesses? We just don't talk to them. In other words, in that place, let's if I say this, maybe this fig, go back to the other case, this date is worth something in Madai. So in Madai, they know. That's not, is that called, is that a safek? Because it's just or is it a choser yediyah? Is it just a lack of my own knowledge? You know what I mean? It's not a safek.
Yeah, well, how different are those two things? In other words, it seems like one way that you generate a safek is to lack access to the relevant knowledge. It doesn't mean the relevant knowledge couldn't be had. It just means you don't have it.
In many halachic circumstances, maybe not in this one, but in many halachic circumstances, it is a difference. Like you can say safek Rabbanan lahakel, or so we don't call it a safek just because you don't know.
Well, I feel I know there are places in Kashrut we said that basically there's a way where we could have technically investigated whether XYZ thing was a treifa, but where we say that the amounts, it would take so much tirtha to it's not that oh, there's just some actually very clear fact that you're not aware of that you easily could have that knowledge. Is that to acquire this knowledge that exists somewhere would require exerting a pretty unreasonable amount of effort. And that in that case, we don't consider that to just be a choser yediyah, that we allow people to treat it as a safek.
Okay, but there are other cases where there is such a thing as a choser yediyah.
I'm not disagreeing with the idea of that exists, but just that I think that here where we're talking about there might be witnesses in
well, I'm wondering if that's what maybe read this Gemara that says ha'ika sahade. It's not maybe there are, it's there are.
No, it's there are. In the other case, it's okay, there's somebody who could figure out whether that thing that this eventually came from was a treifa. It's that there is a way actually pretty clearly finding this out. It's just that it involves so much effort that we actually don't expect that of people. And you can just
in other words,
treat it as
maybe
something.
The question maybe what that question is ha'ika sahade. It's not a safek. It's we just don't know. And then the answer is they're not in front of us, so we're going to treat it as though we don't know.
Well, aren't there a lot of examples where unless there's a dut, it's ke'ilu, it doesn't exist? Well, even if a dut very often is what determines.
Yeah, well, that
something.
also could be going on here in this Gemara. We don't.
That's what it sounds like. That's what it was sounding like to me.
I can't just make up any random suffix. Maybe, maybe Martians came and, those people are dead over there, or maybe, I can't just make up all kinds of random possibilities. I mean, maybe I need some kind of a dude.
Well, it's easy to say there are people in Madai who know that this is worth that. That's great, but they haven't given us testimony here.
It looks like Joel wants to say something.
Well, I think someone may have said this last week, so I apologize if it's this may not be a case of safek, this may be a case of gezerah, right? Which is different, which is that we're worried about what people are. Sorry, whoever said that last week, I think it was very good, and I don't remember who it was, but that we're worried about what's in front of us right now, that people are going to be I think this was a real marriage, and they're going to be and this woman got remarried, and so the fact that the witnesses aren't here, I think, is the answer of they're not here, so no one's going to worry about this. Even if we know that somewhere, right, with the way the Tosfot read this, that there actually are witnesses somewhere who know this, or we've heard about such witnesses. If they're not here in front of us, no one's going to say this marriage was valid, and therefore there's no worry to make a gezerah about.
Is there any mention in this Gemara of safek, or is it only chashash?
I don't think it's safek is ever mentioned, right?
No, I don't think they only, well, at the very beginning, right? That's
Well,
how we
the din-
resolve the problem
the
with
din is
the
suffix.
like original kasha of Beit
Yeah.
Hillel is to say,
It depends how you
right,
understand
have a
Shema.
kiddushes badai, have a kiddushes safek, but that doesn't obviously like that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going on when they were talking about this specific case.
It does say, right, it does say Chayshinan Shema. We worry perhaps. As we don't worry what people say, we worry about the reality.
Yeah, but I think it's the reads it as what Shmuel's really worried about is that someone from Madai would see that this took place, and they would think that it, because they know at home the date is worth Shavei Pruta, they would think that there had been a marriage, and then that would create a problem. So now that's a very specific reading of the sugya, and it doesn't, it's like not obvious to me that you have to read it that way. But it seems like it's part of it. So they actually do have, the Gemara brings now a comparison case, which we sort of need to fill in. So they ask the following question. Lav hainu de Rabbi Chanina, de Amar Rabbi Chanina, Edea betzad astan v'tasar. So we need like a little bit of background to understand like what on earth is going on here. They're saying, oh, isn't this like the case of Rabbi Chanina, who says, in the case of a woman who's been taken captive, if she says that she hasn't been raped by her captors, then we believe, then we accept what she says if there are no witnesses kind of in front of us. And the fact that there might be witnesses like over there where she was taken captive is neither, we just say we don't take seriously. So that's a kind of comparison case where I don't know if that's, doesn't seem they're doing that midin safek. It just seems like they're doing it as a kind of, it's more like Usher said, it's just like a set of rules about what a Jew is or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Who was reading? I've lost track. Josh was reading, sort of. Do you want to finish off with Abaye v'Rava?
Abaye v'Rava la svira lahu lahad Rav Chisda. Abaye v'Rava didn't agree with this specific thing of Rav Chisda. They said, "Im ekelu b'shvuya dimenav la nafsha gabe shabai, naikel be'eshet ish." They said, you can't learn anything from those from that case of the captive woman. A captive woman made herself horrible to her captors, but this is a case of Eshet Ish. We don't have that. There's no case. There's no case for kula. It's not a kal v'chomer or anything like that. It's not comparable.
Yeah,
So-
in other words, like, why would you think you could be lenient in one case but not the other? I think is the idea. You sort of have to. Seems like,
I think it's
No, but
because
they say-
or rather, sorry, the other way around,
Yeah.
right? The cases are so different that we can't assume
Yeah.
they must go the same way.
Yeah, you could be Mekel in that case, but not in this case. So
Yeah,
delete
because
that.
she's like done this kind of, right. I mean, especially in the world where you're saying that she's made herself disgusting to her captors. Like she's gone through all of this like horrible ordeal. There, we're willing to have some kind of special kula, but by a sort of regular, if we're just talking about regular ish each, we're not gonna go so far.
Right. Like it's just the value of a pruta. It's valuation. It's not the special.
Yeah,
case.
it's not sort of emotionally, like psychologically, socially fraught in quite the same way.
So I think we go back to that safek of the Rabbanan, that maybe there are witnesses somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. Ishtar mahi mishpacha besura uparshu Rabbanan mina. And so descendants of that family that got married through the blue stone, they continue to exist, and all the Talmidei Chachamim didn't marry into that family. They stayed away from them. Lav mishum de svira lau de Shmuel, ela mishum de svira lau k'Abaye v'Rava. They didn't think that they didn't agree with Shmuel specifically, but Abaye and Rava's kushya was what they agreed with.
Great. So just so you see the Rashi, right? What is the case that he imagined? So this is actually really the case we're talking that like the Rama is going to be paskening on, and that gets brought as this Yesh Omrim is the case of where she gets married with something we don't know what its value is. Maybe it's worth less than Shavei Pruta, or even we have some good reason to think it is worth less than Shavei Pruta. Now she goes and marries someone else, has a child. What's our situation? And it seems like, at least on Rashi's reading, if this is really a good fit for the case that we're discussing in the later sources, that that there is some concern that the child is in fact a mamzer. Okay, so this right, once you have this sugya, I think you can understand a little bit why I didn't go the route that initially that Asher went in the beginning, where I felt like it just seems like a hard sell to say that the child is not, there's no concern of mamzerut, because it seems like, at least on Rashi's reading in the Gemara, it's pretty clear that the rabbis are not willing to marry into these families, and that seems like that seems probably like that's a concern about mamzerut. So that I think should at least like maybe help some of you feel better about why I initially was like, this seems like a crazy position. Okay, so we're fast running out of time, so I'm not going to go through this business about the Rambam, but you remember that the Rambam it has this idea that, you know, if you can't take the thing to the place and really use it and get the Shavei Pruta out of it, then it doesn't really work. And that leads to a whole debate about whether the Rambam is raising it to a right to concern, to a rabbanan concern. You should see this wonderful Lechem Mishnah, which like lays out the like 4 different readings of the Rambam, but we won't go through them now. But it's like it's beautiful Chazara, so you should all see it. Okay, but I'm actually much more interested in what he says in these few paragraphs later in this case, when he talks about, he explicitly addresses the case in the Gemara that we just saw. So can I get someone else to read Vitu Ika?
You can read.
Great.
Okay. Vitu Ika uvda begemara bepirka kama de kiddushin. Hahul gavra de kiddush ba'avna de kocha velo yizkira rabbeinu afal gavda lacha kabai baraba kutiber shura banan mahahi mishpacha destora. K'tamar mekomakom lo yizkira rabbeinu mishum dahahu dina lo ba'ina la. Basically, like we have this bit that we've been talking about, the bluestone, Rambam didn't mention this uvda, even though the halacha is like Abaye and Rava in that case, as was explained in the one about the family from Surah. Nonetheless, like even though the halacha is like them, the Rambam didn't mention them because this deen was not like necessary. The lo ba'inela, like isn't like it didn't like it didn't need it.
We don't need it anymore.
Yeah, we don't need it, at least like not Ela kedele etzlan milta de Shmuel. Aval anan de etzlan milta de Shmuel de mekudeshet pacha b'shava pruta ben yatsa kol diyesh edim b'shava pruta ben de lo yatsa kol chayshinan de pacha b'shava pruta nami chayshinan. So if you don't hold like Shmuel, that bit was irrelevant, right? Like if you don't believe that chayshinan for these edim, then like you don't need the deen from like the uvda that you emitted. But if you hold like Shmuel, that chayshinan, that maybe somewhere it like maybe it was shava pruta, maybe it was shava pruta elsewhere, then this also is something that we need to be worried about.
Good. So if you remember in the sort of debates about what the Rambam thinks, there's a whole debate about like to what extent the Rambam really operating on the Rambam seems to be operating on the Shmuel concern, and that explains why we don't need this, why the Rambam isn't going to bring this, right? Because if we already have like Shmuel, then we don't need to go down this whole path. Okay, but then this is where the things get interesting.
Okay. Valkin yesh litmoa al harama shekatav din ze hator bishmo umash masham zoik, where you should be shocked at the position of the Ramah that the Torah recorded. ומשמשם דפסק כבאי ברבה, דהיכא דיצא הכל חיישינן, כתאמר שם, והאיכא סהדי באידית, והוא מפרש כפירוש התוספות, דרצה לומר דיצא הכל, דאיכא עדים, ולכך כתב, אלא אפילו יצא הכל וכולי, חיישינן להו, אבל לא אסרינן לה וכולי. זה נראה דתו שם. So the Rama seems to paskin like Abaye and Rava, that like when there is like a rumor that there are adim elsewhere, like we saw with the whole like and explains it according to the parish of the Tosfot, which is right that like there's like a rumor going around there are in fact adim. But we don't. What was the last three on la? But we don't usher her to the like current.
To the current husband, I think.
Right.
As in the second guy.
Yeah. Like even if there's like a yatsa kol that like the guy in the first kiddushin that there was shava pruta, we don't usher her to the second husband. The
Just to go back for 1 second because I think we may have gotten something flipped around. The right. The real question is if you think that. If you agree with Shmuel that we're always concerned that it might be worth something somewhere else, you don't need to go into this whole
rumor.
You don't need a rumor. If you paskin like Abaye Reva, then you need the rumor, and so that's what's being
right. Like which one we go like that? Yeah. Like do we need Yetzah HaKol, or is it just like if you paskin like Shmuel, it should be in any scenario, no matter what, we should always be worried that like maybe we should have a pruta, and it should be like suffix. But you don't need like
and that would be the Durabanan, right?
Which would be your Durabana?
That we're always choshesh for pachot misheva pruta. That wouldn't be.
It seems like unless you're following the Torah's reading of the Rambam, who thinks it's Deoraita for some reason.
Okay. So he's bringing the Ramah, seems to hold like the Baya and Rava position, which implies that you need like a rumor that there are adim in order for this to be a chashash. V'kashalav tuba zekevan to have a psak k'shmuel k'dichtav Torah la'ayel mina v'katav harama im yada misheni v'lo gerish rishon habalad kasher denehi dechayshinan l'kidushe rishon latzricha get lotzia misheni avol lo lifsol habalad mimenu. This is difficult, like for the Ramah, because it seems like he paskins like Shmuel from that which the Torah wrote later on, the bit that you are focusing on, where it says like if she had a child from the second husband in the case of this initial suffix, whatever kiddushin, the child is not a mamzer, because the whole thing where we're like choshesh for like the first kiddushin, it's like we're choshesh for that to require her a get, but not to puzzle the child. But because he just says, I'm assuming what he's reading from this is that from that language of like chayshinan l'kiddushe rishon, there's no mention of like a kol or anything like that. It implies that just like we're choshesh for the first kiddushin, that maybe they were shava pruta, like stam, which would seem to imply he holds like Shmuel.
Right, exactly. And so you can see actually if you look in the Beit Yosef and the Bedek Habayit, the Bedek Habayit basically says like, oh no, it's a Ta'ut Sofrim, and the Ramah doesn't really say that.
It's a really long Bedek Habayit.
It's so long. It's very interesting. But yeah, he basically is trying to resolve this apparent problem where it seems like on the one hand, when the Ramah, it's also an opinion of the Ramah that says that we need to be, or at least partial opinion of Ramah, that we have a concern in order enough to require her to get a get. But then he seems to say, and also the child is kasher, and it's not obvious that those two things should go together. So the Bedek Habayit is just going to kind of reach in and like fix the text. But we'll see. Maybe we'll just do the Beit Shmuel, who has like, I don't know. There are a couple other options for ways of thinking about what's going on.
Right. So the next bit I think is just him building on the kushia. ואם כן, כיוון דפסק שמואל וכולי, בכל כבני חיישינן לה, אפילו דלי כשווה פרוטה, ומאי הייתה כתב, ולא שרינן לה, אפילו העדים רחוקים וכולי, בלאו הכי לא שרינן לה. Right, again, like, what are you dealing with? Like whether the Adim are far, whether like again, it's like we should be choshesh. Like if you just hold like Shmuel in general, it doesn't really matter all this Adim like business. And continuing, v'chein ma shekatav, v'lo asrinan la al pi isha ukarov v'chulei. Right, like, and that whole bit about like, oh, but we wouldn't osir her based off of what like a woman or a relative said. Like, no, we would, because we would still have this chashash. Like, it wouldn't matter what the deal with the Adim is, essentially.
Right. Good. Okay. I think we can skip his like little kushia acheret because I think it's not like the most useful. I just want to remind myself. Okay. Let us look at let's just do the Beit Shmuel rather than well, actually no. Let's do the Chalkat Mechokek and we can leave the Beit Shmuel for later. It looks like a long Chalkat Mechokek, but really he's just quoting the sugya for like a decent chunk of it. So we'll skip the part that's just the sugya. So this is at least in my edition, it's listed as Yod Aleph Havlad Kasher. If I can get someone to read once people find it, that would be awesome. Everybody see where we are? Okay, great. Someone want to read? Yavni, can I impose on you again?
Sure. Where do you want me to start?
Start right at the beginning, and then when you get to there's like a parentheses where he starts quoting the sugya, and I'll tell you where to skip once you get to that.
Cool. זהו, הוולד כשר, זהו דעת הרמה, וכתב בית יוסף דאזיל בשיטת רי, דסביר עלי דאין הקדש, אין מקדש אלא מקומו ושעתו, וקידושי הראשון אינו כלום. וחומרה בעלמא, oh wait, yeah, should I stop and
Keep going. Yeah.
וחומרה בעלמא דצריכו גט, וחומרה בעלמא דצריכו גט הראשון מפני גזירה דשמא יש כאן אחד מאנשי מדעי וכולי, כדלעיל.
So that's exactly what I was talking to Joel about at the beginning, that like one way to read what Shmuel's problem is that there might be, you might come to find that there might be a person there from Madai who believes that this thing is worth Shavei Pruta. Now he thinks that they're married. Now we have an issue. Okay. That's just sort of summary. Keep going.
ועל כן הוולד כשר, אבל לדעת הרמב"ם, אם שווה פרוטה במדי, הווה הוולד ממזר גמור. ואם הוא ספק, הווה ספק ממזר.
Good.
Yeah.
So I just want to highlight this, right? No one has actually brought this out. It seems like the two opinions, so far we've had an opinion that says either there's no mamzer root problem at all, or the apparent position of Rabbanan in the sugya, which is we don't want to marry into these families, which seems like it's probably a real mamzer root problem, and maybe it's merely a safek, but at least now he's spelling out that there seems like there are really three options. Option number one, there's no problem. There's nothing to see here, folks. There's no problem at all. Far end on the other side is like the Rambam, according to the Torah, there's a deraita problem. The person is really a mamzer, and then a middle ground where there's a safek.
Wait, it seems like, but those aren't different opinions. Those are different cases, right? That it's if you know that it's worth a shavei puta in Madai, then it's a mamzer. And if you don't, if you think it might be this.
Right. Good. Okay.
ויש לדקדק על דברי הרמה, מפשט לשון הגמרא, משמע דאין הוולד כשר.
Okay, great. Now he's gonna quote this whole long Gemara. So you want to go down like really almost to the bottom where the parentheses closes. We're not going to read the whole Gemara again because we just saw it, and just go to mashma. Mashma de'i have sfirale kishmuel. Like 3 lines up from the bottom in mine, 4 lines up from the bottom. I can just read it if you want.
Sorry. Yeah, I can't.
Mashma di have sfira like Kishmuel, have nicha de pershe Rabbana minahu. Uledivrei Rama, Shmuel lo ka'amar rak lechush le'inyan get, mi'arishon, lo tzia misheni, aval havlad kasher. Ve'efshar de Rabbanan be'gemara, machmirei anafshaihu, afa de havlad kasher, mikol makom pagum hukstat. So his way of the Chalkat Machlokek's way of solving this problem is just to say, well, what Rabbanan are doing is not telling you that there's a real mamzerut problem, like kind of in its core. Actually, just that there's some other kind of pagam or sort of concern or discomfort, or maybe kind of negative thing going on with the family, but they're not telling you can't marry into those families and like this family can't enter the kahal at all. You're just saying there might be some kind of initial concern. So their way of separating or like making sense of the potential sort of conflict between, on the one hand, saying this person needs a get, on the other hand, saying, and also the children are okay, is just to say, well, I never really thought that there was going to be a problem with the children in the first place. Now, the question this raises for me is, why do you think she needs a get, if not for this reason? Seems like it must be that she needs a get, like, why do you think that there's sort of, right, lechush le'inyan get me'arishon lo tzia mishini, for what like, I guess we're more concerned about the like din of ish et ish. I don't know. It seems like a kind of strange line to walk.
Wasn't that the concern about the person who sees it and might like to
yeah, but that should be then kal vachomer for the children. Like, why doesn't that extend to the children? If that's what you're worried about, right? You're worried that like somebody's looking out on the outside in, and now they think that like, you know, the guy has she's divorced the first guy, gone to the second guy, and then gone back, and that we know that's asur. That's an explanation for why she can't kind of go back and marry the first guy, but that's not an explanation of why she needs a get from the first guy in order to marry the second guy, right?
I mean, isn't it just that we want to have legal certainty and where possible want to have as much clarity and, you know, definitiveness and status as possible? And yet where there's a child, we're going to do everything we can to make the child not a mamzer. Like, I think they're leaving flexibility on purpose, and it's a policy issue that makes sense.
Yeah, I just think it is like there. I mean, as a matter of policy, I'm with you that like obviously having fewer mamzerim is like is a kind of innate good, right? But there are these kinds of conceptual problems that get raised when you're on the one hand going to say there really was a marriage. There's at least a possibility there really was a marriage here, and on the other hand, going to say, yeah, and the children are kasher.
I don't understand why they're requiring the get and not offering an annulment of the marriage. I think we raised the possibility before that it could be mekach ta'ut or some other possibility, and in this case where you don't know the value of the thing, that would make sense to me at least.
But is there a ta'ut? Like, maybe she knows, right? If she knows that she's getting less than shavei pruta, and she's like, okay, I don't know. And she maybe, right, like it's a ta'ut that she like doesn't know about Shmuel. Like, I don't know. That seems complicated.
Well, isn't that where the saying that like someone might look at it from the outside and think it's a marriage is helpful? Because we're saying there isn't this effect that there was a marriage. We know there wasn't a marriage, but we want a get for appearances because we want to have, yeah.
Why isn't a court annulment sufficient? Why does it need to be
I don't know.
a get? Like, how is that resolving the problem more or in a better way than?
I mean, I think there was a way of saying like, oh, this actually requiring the get makes Yavni's problem worse, because the fact that you're making her get a get would seem to suggest that you think there was a marriage, right? If you didn't think that, you wouldn't be making her married. Like, so there's a way in which, I don't know, it kind of cuts both ways. But I take your point that like once we we're doing the get for appearances, maybe like dafka because we want people to treat the children as okay. And we think that this will sort of placate the audience, so to speak, even though really it wasn't necessary.
Are you saying that because with a get, there's documentation and there's more of a public, like Beit Din element?
Yeah,
Whereas
it's public, and there's not a kind of right, like, and you see this happen in the if you read the sugya the way the Chalkat Mechalkek reads it, and you think that what's going on is that the rabbis are just sort of like taking on a more machmir position not to marry into this family because they're deciding to be sort of frum about it. If you think that that's what's going on, you might really be worried that people might say, oh well, yeah, I know sort of mikara din that the children are mamzerim, but like, I don't feel comfortable with that. And there's a way in which the court saying, okay, I've given a get, this is sort of all above board, creates some culture around that. That being said, I think like the kind of shot reading here is that she has the kids before the get comes. So like, I don't know if the get's going to do much good from a public relations perspective. Because like, I think, we can kind of assume that people who are concerned about these issues know that kind of retroactive thing doesn't solve the problem.
No, is anyone suggesting that a retroactive thing would solve the problem? I don't
No,
think so.
but I guess I'm saying that like from a public relations perspective, saying she needs a get is not gonna make people.
No, saying she needs a get is the ideal. We're talking about the ideal. And there's two cases, I think, here. I mean, or one case. She either, if she comes to us before she has any children, then we tell her get a get from the first one because like the Re says, no,
because somebody might be
it's
watching.
really nothing. It's really eno klum, but it's a chumra ba'alma that it doesn't look good. But and then if she didn't get the get, she didn't do what we wanted her to do. So now she got married to the second. So the Vladim are kosher because they really didn't need a get. And why did the rabbis not want? And then you say, well, but the rabbis didn't want to marry them. That shows that you really did need to get. No, they were just being stringent on themselves because of outward appearances. So I don't think that we're saying that the get helps. If she would have gotten a get, then there is no outward appearances.
Right. Yeah.
Is that summary correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think then like the question is the get, yeah, I mean, I think that just, the whole thing is about what we think the sort of society around is thinking or not thinking. And yeah, the get is designed just to kind of make people feel more comfortable, right? It's just a chumrah to kind of make everything seem like it's above board.
Right, because people will say, "Well, wait a second, we were at the wedding, and there, and we know it was. We think it really was worth Sheva Pruta." And
right, we know that, like, even if we even know that it wasn't Sheva Pruta, but we also know that in general we still think that there is a possibility. Like, even if they say, "Oh, well, we know that we sort of paskin like Shmuel as a general matter." Lexi, were you going to say?
But what does it mean to paskin like Shmuel? Paskin like Shmuel means that we need a get. Midin, but just for outward appearances we need to get, because people don't know. In other words, Shmuel is talking about people who are not who think that they know you need a pruta, and they think that this is a pruta because they know somewhere else it's a pruta. But really, that's a ridiculous. Really, we don't care about that, and we don't care about it halachically. But we don't. I mean, not halachically. We don't care about it meikar hadin, but to assuage the nervous people, we tell them they need a get. And since we tell them that law, since we created that law, they need a get. If we don't do a get, we really aren't allowed to marry the children, because that would undermine our very halachic establishment. We established this rule, you need a get. from the first one.
Like
And if
a
we would
lot of
say,
this,
oh, but if you don't get a get, you can go ahead and marry them, then we undermine our own position. So we have to say you don't marry them, but in Achanami, the children are kosher.
no, but the kids are kosher. And I think the whole point of the other way we were talking
Kosher,
about this,
exactly.
like, no, they're kosher. And the get, I feel like, I mean, yes,
Exactly.
the way that you're articulating it, like this get, it doesn't have the exact same status as we would often, like, it doesn't have the exact same halachic status in some ways as we often relate to this as having. It's more of like a precaution, but it also is about like, I don't know, like Revolution
No,
has the whole
it's-
thing about how mamzerim are like, the whole point of mamzerim is that they're like people that we consider to like have like more like a serious pagum in them, essentially by virtue of like the relationship they came out of and how they were raised, which is also part of why, for example, like kids born of Nida aren't mamzerim, whereas kids born of like other arayot are mamzerim. That like we still don't think it's great. We still think that like we have like a ben Nida idea, but we don't think that somebody who's born from like a woman who is in Nida is necessarily raised in like as problematic of an environment as like somebody who was born out of incest or something like that, or born from like proper adultery. And what we're essentially saying here is that like the get is essentially indicating that like we don't think this is like a good situation. Like we think that when it comes to how people should be setting up like their relationships and how they relate, like those relate to the community, that like you should be very clear about like not having potentially two kind of open things at one time. But on the other hand, we're saying that it's clear enough that this woman was like actually in a relationship with the guy who was the father of this child when that child was born, that like we don't think that that's like a mom's there. We don't think that
Yeah,
that
but if she could
kid
have been a
is
valid
how we
where-
conceive of a mom's there.
Yeah, but
like
we don't care. We don't care how valid. We don't care what kind of relationship she has with the second man. If the first marriage was a valid kiddushin, then however loving and however established that second relationship was, all the children are mamzerim. All we're saying is that on a strictly halachic basis, the first marriage is garnished, is nothing. It says eno klum, as the Chalkat Machoket quotes Lurie.
Yeah.
It's not anything. So it's just she just was walking down the street and picked up a tamar, as far as we're concerned. And then if you ask, why do we need a get? That's just because people were at the wedding and they saw her picking up that tamar and they think that she's married. So we need a get, but it's really nothing happened. And the rabbis, of course, can't tell you, oh, but you can go ahead and marry the children. Well, then they'd be contradicting themselves. How can they say you need a get and also say you can marry the children? So they have to say you can't marry the children. But of course, the children are kosher because the first event was a non-event. I don't think you have to bring in the level of committedness between the people.
I do think there's something.
I mean, I think that discussion is interesting, but I don't think it's relevant exactly here.
I do think
that's
there's
like
something.
about committedness.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm saying, sorry, I was just saying.
No, this
it's
is
not
a different
about-
point. So finish that.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's about committedness. I'm saying that the whole point of like how all this exists is how a community relates to people as being in a relationship, whether a community relates to a person A as being single or married, and B, whether them as being married to XYZ person or like in an exclusive relationship with XYZ person. And that like, that's
right. So the community are
point.
confused in this case.
Yeah, I'm saying that like this whole thing is like, because the way that your relationship is premised on how you exist within and are perceived by community and how community like relates to you as married or in a relationship with XYZ person. And so like those are inextricable things. It's not like, it's not about like their committedness. It's about like, does this community relate to you as being in a relationship with this person or not?
Yeah,
I
but
think
I'm
that's
saying,
very different
even
than
if the
saying it's about
community,
their
you
internal
can
relationship.
call it, I can use it doesn't matter what words I use. If the community views it as a relationship, but yet she was married to the first guy, then the children are mamzerim. It doesn't, you see what I'm saying?
And what we're saying here is that like this is like a whole thing where she was not so clearly married to the first guy, and because we don't think that this sort of like uncertainty is an ideal way for like these relationships to exist, we say you give the get, because that's basically a way of saying is like, but you shouldn't really like, we don't think this is an ideal way of structuring your relationships, basically. And we don't want a lot of these situations to abound. And at the same time, like we're acknowledging the community like sees that child as hers from like a legitimate relationship.
Well, I think the whole point is that the community is confused. But anyway, let's Sarah finish up.
Yeah, just the last thing I wanted to say was initially, right, at least as the Maggid Mishnah sort of described it, there's you could have the Shmuel sets of concerns, which are concerns about just kind of, we generally think that this might be worth something somewhere else, and then Rav and Abaye are concerned about a kol that comes out. But once we read Shmuel like the way that the Ri is reading it, where the concern is really someone there might see, then actually there's kind of been a collapsing of Shmuel and Rav and Abaye, where like actually what's gone on is we've even though we're going to kind of hold like Shmuel in some technical way, what we're really worried about is someone might come out and say something. So there's I don't know, there's like an interesting little move that's been made kind of implicitly, where what in the end what we're concerned about is what someone might say, which is exactly what like the Rav and Abaye concern in the sugya was. At least I think the way the Magi Mishnah lays it out, or Lecha Mishnah lays it out, is really helpful in that respect. I guess I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Complicated topic, but interesting. All right, Yavni, why don't you continue?
Should I start or do we want to go on break?
Oh, it's what time is it? Oh yeah, we should take a break.
10
Let's take a break. Yeah, thank you. For 5 minutes.
Hey, Yavni, how are you doing?
Okay. How about you?
You ready to rock and roll?
I hope so.
As I say to my bar mitzvah students, Bo ne'avenu negalgel.
Say it again. Oh,
Bo ne'avenu negalgel. Let's rock and roll.
very funny.
Or if I want to say it in nouns, I say Evan Vigil Gulbuba. Rock and roll, baby.
Very funny.
I've had a way of finding a lot of funny things like that with my kids. I had a student whose bar mitzvah was just a couple of weeks ago on Shabbat Chanukah, and there's one of the lines in the Tzavtarah says "Tachat hagefen v'tachat te'ena." So I said to him at one point, "I bet you didn't even know that a gefen and te'ena had a tachat." And we spent the next 3 months joking about fig butts and grape butts. So.
Okay, Yavni, go ahead.
Start. All right. So we're moving on to seif hey, and right, and we're still talking about issues of whether we think the kiddushin happen on a shaveh puta or not, but it's a different topic and it's based on a different sugya in the Gemara. So we're going to start back in a Mishnah and then the Gemara, and then we're going to go into. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sugya, something that I think is interesting and like even sort of poetic about the way it's structured, and then we'll dig into like a particular question that I have with it that comes up in a couple of Rishonim, and then look at the Shulchan Aruch. And so we're on Mem Vav Amud Aleph. I'm sharing the screen, and I'm going to start with the Mishnah. האומר לאישה, התקדשי לי בתמר הזו, התקדשי לי בזו, אם יש באחת מהן שווה פרוטה מקודשת. So if someone says to a woman, betroth me with this date, I meant to say that the title of this seif is whether you can be betrothed on the first date or the second date or the third date. Whether you can get engaged on the first date. Or the second.
Is that the old dating process?
Yeah.
Okay.
האומר לאישה, so if we say to a woman, be betrothed to me with this date, be betrothed to me with this date, be betrothed to me with this date, if one of them is worth puta, then she is mekudeshet, and if v'im lav ena mekudeshet, and if in any one of them it is not worth a puta, then she's not mekudeshet. Bezo ubezo ubezo. Im yesh shaveh puta bekulan mekudeshet ve'im lav ena mekudeshet. If you say betroth me with this and with this and with this, if there is in all of them, if all of them together are worth a puta, then she is betrothed, and if not, then she's not. הייתה אוכלת ראשונה ראשונה אינה מקודשת עד שיהיה באחת מהן שווה פרוטה. If she's eating them one at a time, then she is not betrothed unless one of them will have the value of a puta. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara asks, Man Tana hitkadshi hitkadshi. Who is the Tana who said this case of be betrothed to me, be betrothed to me? Amar Rabba, Rabbi Shimon hu, de Amar ad sheyomar shvu'a lekol echad ve'echad. Rabba says this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who says in a Mishnah in Shavuot, where the case is there's one person who several people come to him at once, suing him for saying that he has their objects in his under his watch, and he takes an oath. So if someone tells you, it says that you have something, you need to give it back to them, you can take an oath and say that I don't have anything of yours, and then you're obligated for that oath. And the question is, if multiple people come and you say, I don't have from any of you, how many oaths have you taken? And so the Tanakama there says, here it is, Hayu chamisha tovinoto, amru lo ten lanu pikadon sheyesh lanu biyadcha, shvu'a ani she'en lachem biyadi, eino chayav ela ba'achat. Shvu'a she'en lacha biyadi velo lacha velo lecha, chayav al kol va'achat ve'achat. The Tanakama says, if he says, I don't have anything from you or from you or from you, then you're already chayav on all of them. Whereas Rabbi Shimon, if you see at the bottom, Rabbi Shimon says, Ad sheyomar shvu'a lekol achad ve'achad. He has to say shvu'ani she'en. He's only obligated for all 5 oaths if he says, I take an oath that I don't have of yours, and I take an oath that I don't have of yours, and I take an oath that I don't have of yours. Otherwise, he's only made 1 oath, even though it's for multiple parties, even though he specified each of the parties. And so Rabbi is saying that this is parallel to our case, just like there's a legal statement and then there's a specification of an object. And if there's one legal statement and multiple specifications of the object, then according to Rabbi Shimon, that's only one statement. And therefore you could count all the dates together. Whereas, so it's the distinction between hitkachili bazo, hitkachili bazo, versus hitkachili bazo, bazo, bazo. Now you notice there's like a mistake here, which is that they're not really asking which Tana says hitkachili, hitkachi, the first case, right? The Mishnah is broken up into 3 cases, Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. So the Tanakama also agrees. Everyone agrees on the first case that hitkachili bazo, hitkachili bazo is counts as separate things, separate statements. It would be separate oaths. You would be chayav on all the oaths, and it would be the machloket comes in the next one, the bazo, 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 that Rabbi Shimon says that it's all one oath, or it's all one statement of kiddushin, and therefore you can count the days together. Whereas the Tanakama presumably would say otherwise.
Can you show us that Mishnah again? Because the hitkachili is parallel to the actual statements of Rabbi Shimon, no? Because he's saying, I'm not in din, I'm just saying the actual idea of like saying shvu'ah on each one,
right,
is like saying hitkachili on each one.
Right.
And he's saying in such a case, it's separate. Presumably in any other case, it's all together.
Everyone, but the Tanakama already says, Amru lo ten, Amru shvu'ani she'en lachem bayadi. Right, the difference is shvu'ani she'en, shvu'ah she'en lecha bayadi ve'en lecha. Tanakama here, is
here
saying,
says chayav al kol echad ve'echad.
Chayav al kol echad ve'echad.
And Rav Shimon would say, no, that's not a significant enough separation between them, just because, which is like the case B in the Mishnah, our Mishnah.
Right, exactly.
Which is where there's a small words of difference, but not a big words of difference.
Right.
Not
exactly.
saying the operative verb, like hitkachili or shavua.
Right.
Rav Shimon is saying you need the operative verb to differentiate.
Right.
Whereas this second opinion that you highlighted here, is that the Tanakama also?
This is the Tanakama, yeah.
So it's so the Mishnah. So it comes out that what does our Mishnah say again? Let's go back to our Mishnah.
It's bazo, bazo, bazo. That's the case where they disagree.
He says there.
Rashi says
that he would say you're not mikudeshin. Exactly. On that he would say not mikudeshin.
Yeah. Rashi says who the have man tana kachi kachi, who the have pirta aval bezo bezo lav pirtahu. That you've specified as long as you say hitkadshi multiple times, but if you say hitkadshi once and bezo multiple times, that counts as one statement. That's the opinion that they're targeting to Rabbi Shimon.
No, wait a second. I was a little bit confused. Isn't the bezo, wouldn't that be considered separate acts according to the other Mishnah?
Exactly. According to the Tanakama, that would be considered separate acts. But yeah.
And so therefore this Mishnah is like Rav Shimon.
Right. Specifically the second part, yes. Yes,
second
this
part,
Mishnah,
right.
specifically the second part of the Mishnah is like, yeah. Next, yes, correct. The next statement of the Gemara, bezo ubezo ubezo, im yesh bekulan shvei puta chule. So it's quoting the second section now.
I still don't understand the point. I'm sorry, maybe I'm a little bit slow but Bet and Gimel seem to be exactly like Rav Shimon, both of them. Rav Shimon says,
I don't. Gimel is sort of. We haven't gotten into Gimel yet. Aleph and Bet seem. I think it's a minor point. If I can move
Fine,
on,
go
I
ahead,
think
go ahead.
there's a larger point that I'm driving toward, but I don't
sorry,
think.
I'm delaying you. Yes, go ahead.
And then if it's not clear at the end, I'm happy to come back to it. So now the Gemara states the bet and says ahia. On which section does this refer? Ilema aresha. So here again, there's another mistake. What this is actually referring to is the third section. It's asking whether the third section, where she eats them one at a time, is that referring to the case of the first Mishnah where he has said hitkachi multiple times, or the second where he said hitkachi bezo bezo bezo. Ilema aresha. So the Gemara asks, if it's referring to the first section, what difference does it make that so where he says itkachili bezo, and she eats them one at a time? And so why do we need to know that she eats them? Even afilu manachat nami, even if she received them and just took and placed them, then she would also be the same conclusion, which is that we need a shavei puta in a single date as opposed to being able to combine the dates together. Deha itkadshili bezuka amar. Because he said hitkachili bezo multiple times, so he's already separated them out, and it doesn't matter whether she eats them one at a time or not. Okay, so we say this doesn't refer to the reisha, ela aseifa ve'afilu bakamaita hamilvehi. So rather, it must refer to the seifa. And now the question is, the kushya on that is, so we assume that he has said itkachili bezo bezo bezo, and he gives her the dates, but as she's receiving them, she's eating them. And afilu bakamaita means even if only the first one specifically is worth, because it says achiye be'achat mehen shavei puta. So Rashi explains afilu bakamaita, afilu harishona או השנייה שווה פרוטה, אף על פי שאין באחרונה שווה פרוטה מקודשת. Do you think it means that even if she got the shevei pruta in the first case, but the last case is not, the last date is not worth a pruta? Vehamalvehi, she explains, kevan de kiddushin lo nigmeru ad shetikablam kulam, because the kiddushin didn't happen until she receives all the dates that he's giving her for the kiddushin. Vehi kvar achla et harishona, and she's already eaten the first one kodem shetikne ota bekiddushin. Havyala rishona malve gaba. So because she's eaten the first date already, she now has eaten something that she hasn't gotten the kiddushin, so she's eaten it, and now it's as if he had loaned her money before, and now he wants to do kiddushin with her on the money that she owes him, which we know that doesn't work. We need to have the kiddushin happen with the transfer happen with the kiddushin. It can't be something that she's already gotten. So I want to pause for a moment and talk about the structure. I pointed out that there's some confusion in which parts, like the Mishnah has laid out these three cases and given them to us, and then there's some confusion as to which part refers to which part. And this may be a stretch, but I sort of think that this is, I don't know if it's intentional, but it sort of reflects the case that we're talking about, because we have this man giving this woman
date one at a time. And sort of the structure of the Gemara is saying that is coming to show us that that's like a confusing case and can lead to problems in terms of knowing what which statement refers to which date and which value is needed for which date. And if it seems like a stretch, the next statement, I think, maybe sort of reinforces it, which is Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Harei shulchan veharei basar veharei sakin ve'ein lanu le'echol, which is, I think, very funny. And Rashi, so here we have a table and we have meat and we have a knife. We have all the things we need and we don't have the ability to eat. Rashi explains, Kolomar, Harei lanu mishna shnuya ve'ein lanu yodim lefarsha. He says, like, these problems that the Gemara is bringing up are really hard problems, and we have this Mishnah that looks like a regular Mishnah, but actually these questions that we're asking on it are very confusing, and it's impossible to know which the third section, which the Reisha or the Seif, or whether the Gimel refers to that or the other. But I think it's also like it's using the analogy of food and eating, and it could also be referring to, like, we have these dates that are all together with the Shavei Puta, but we're not sure if we can have Kiddushin because there's this death. So that was the like little bit of poetry I wanted to, or like metaphorical reading of the Gemara that I wanted.
Why can't Gimel refer to Bet? Because
So that
Gimel seems to me you're including them all together. And then we're saying, yeah, even though you're including them all together, but if you eat them one by one, then they're gone now, and it's alone, and therefore won't work. So they fit very nicely together.
So yeah, I agree, and I think that's the natural reading. The kushia they're bringing, which is the next section of Gemara, is going to get farther into like why this is a kushia for them. So I think it'll be a better explanation than these five words of filu kamaita v'hamil vehi. So I think if we keep going, that should become clearer. But I think, like, in terms of reading the Mishnah for its simple understanding, it's not as hard as the Gemara is making it out to be. I agree. Yeah, other questions, or does that make sense? Okay, so the next section is, we're going to have two sections. We're going to have Rav and Shmuel arguing that it should actually be, the Gimel should actually be on Aleph, and then we're going to have Rabbi Ami arguing that it should be on Bet. Rav ושמואל אמרי travaihu לעולם הרישא ולא מבאי כאמר, לא מבאי מנחת. So Rav and Shmuel both say that the Gimel belongs to Aleph, the case where it said hitkadsili. Velo mibai kamar, and we don't need, but then why do we need the third section at all? Like, it doesn't matter if she's eating, why are we adding this? And they say lo mibai manachat, we don't need the case where it's resting, where she doesn't eat them. Di'i ika shavei puta in ilo lo. We already know that. It's like obvious. He made this statement about one of them. If it has a shavei puta, then she's mekudeshet. If it doesn't, then she's not mekudeshet. Why does it matter if he made some other statement and gave some other date? Aval ochelet. But in the case where she's eating them, ho'il umekarve haniata ema gamra umakne nafsha. But because she's taking them and hungrily eating them, we might think, and we're going to reject this, we might think that that because she's so eager for them, that she's clearly very interested in this, and she is betrothing herself on these single dates that are not worth a puta. Kamash malan. So the third section of the Mishnah comes to reject that. So I think what's going on here is Rav and Shmuel are like wanting to be very clear, are saying that what this Mishnah is doing is wanting to be very clear, because we might have still in our minds that the issue of the Shavei Puta is really about discovering whether the woman wants this wedding, wants to be betrothed on this Shavei Puta. Remember, we had that sort of ambiguity of whether Ein Isha Makne Nafsha is, and so for them, this third section is coming to say, like, even if we can be very clear, we have this evidence that she is desiring this marriage on less than a puta, what we really care about is the technicality of it needs to be more than a puta as a general rule for the kiddushin to work. Questions?
Well, I thought hanaya that the hanaa is karov means that you can't call it that we thought we're not calling it a milva, we're calling it she's consuming it in this, in other words, that's called it's here, it's still here because she's having that pleasure from having those dates in her stomach, and so
But they're saying that it's referring to the reisha, that it's ha'omer l'isha itkachili b'tamar hazo itkachili b'tamar hazo.
They're saying that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Rav Shmuel Amar Yitraveu le'olam ha'reisha. This opinion, that's why I tried to explain why I think like what the big lesson is of this opinion, like what they're trying to inculcate, because it doesn't really survive. We end up in the like the halachic sources go with the last opinion of Rabbi Ami. So yeah, so if you're not impressed with the argument, then
What is the argument then?
what is Rav and Shmuel's argument?
Yes.
The argument is that the reason, right? So what is the argument against it being on the first one? Is that it's redundant, right? If we've said saying be betrothed to me with this, be betrothed to me with this is
Yeah. Then if you say and on that, and if she ate them, it also doesn't work. You already told me it didn't work.
right, exactly. And if she ate them, it also doesn't work. So what
If
they're
you
saying
told me
is,
it doesn't work,
you
you
might
say
have
it can't-
thought.
Why
You
tell
might
me
have
twice
thought
that
that
it doesn't
the
work?
What's that?
Why tell me twice that it doesn't work? You already
Right,
told me
why tell me twice that it
Hikachili
doesn't
it doesn't work, and now you're going to tell me, and if you do Hikachili and you ate it, it also doesn't work. Well, of
Right.
course it doesn't work. And
Right.
also if you threw it out the window, it doesn't work.
Right.
Lots of
And
things
so
don't work because you already said Hikachili in each one.
Right. And so their argument is that you might have thought that the reason it doesn't work to be Mekudeshet unless than a puta is because she doesn't want to be Mekudeshet unless than a puta. But if I see her eating them, then it sure seems like she wants it. And that's why they have to say even if she eats them one at a time.
Okay, now I understand.
Then she's still
in other words, we thought maybe there's another parameter. There's a pruta is one way of getting married, but also is getting married by a particularly enjoyable experience. And this eating of this date is particularly enjoyable, and therefore it's worth more to her pruta. It's like if you go to the supermarket and buy dates, you got to take them home and take them out of the package and put them on the table, and therefore they become more valuable as their presentation becomes closer. A cup of tea costs a lot more in a restaurant than it does, to make yourself. So if it's already prepared and ready and he's handing it to her to eat, maybe even though it's not worth a pruta, it's like her pleasure from eating it is worth more than a pruta.
Right.
And on that we say, Kamash Malan, no, even eating it doesn't work.
Right. Yeah.
Very nice.
That was a good, clear explanation. Thank you. Rabbi Ami Amar Leolam HaSeifa. Rabbi Ami thinks that the Gimel refers to the bet case where there hasn't been multiple statements of Hikachi. Umay ad she'eh be'achat me'en shaveh puta. And what does it mean when it says unless one of them is worth a shaveh puta? Ad she'eh be'achrona shaveh puta. What it really means is unless the last one is worth a puta alone, like she's eating them, and the last one is worth a puta. That's Rabbi Ami's statement. And now we have an additional statement from Rabba. Amava shma mina mid Rabbi Ami tlat. So we learn three conclusions from Rabbi Ami's statement. One is shma mina hamekadesh b'milveh eina mekudeshet. It's that argument that we made.
Because if the first date was very valuable and the other ones weren't,
right.
So it's already been eaten, and the kiddushin only finishes when he finishes giving her all the dates.
Right.
So it's too late.
But if we didn't, and therefore if we could be mikudeshet on an milveh, then that should work because she owes him that first valuable date, and she should be mikudeshet on it. But because he says davka ba'achrona shaveh puta, therefore we learn that a mekadesh במלווה אינה מקודשת. ושמע מינה המקדש במלווה.
Actually, I said it a little bit wrong. I said it a little wrong. It's not the first one is very valuable. It's that the three of them together that she got are worth a pruta. So the two before are added to the one now,
Mhm.
and that together that makes, because remember we're talking about bazoo. So therefore, it's all going together, and it's that the first two were like 2/3 of a pruta, and we require them, so therefore they need to be here, and therefore a malva would work, and then we say no, it doesn't work. Malva doesn't work. In other words, if the Mishnah wouldn't have taught us that, we would have thought a malva might work, and therefore, even though they're not here, it works. And the Mishnah comes and tells me, no, if she ate them, even though they're grouped together, they need to all be here present.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm being
Thank you for that
verbose.
clarification. That's important. Yes. Ushma mina hamekadesh b'malve uputa da'ata puta. And we learned that because it works if the last one is worth a puta, therefore we know that even though he said kachili bezo, and the first two zuz have already become a milveh, it still works because when he said that, she was surely thinking about the last one, which is worth a puta, which meaning like if you say be mikudeshet to me, and I will release your debt that you owe me, and I'll give you this puta, that does work because we say that we say that what she is mikudeshet on is the puta.
In other words, yeah, it's interesting. In other words, even though you're giving her 6 prutas worth of value, let's say,
right,
and maybe she's only saying, I want to get married for 6 prutas. I don't want to get married for 1 pruta. In which case it wouldn't work because those first 5 prutas are all gone now. They've been in their milveh. But we say, no, she's not saying she wants, even though she's accepting 6 prutas, she really is happy to get married with 1 pruta.
Right.
Which is interesting because if you remember what Rav Landis talked about like where the ring was not the ring that she thought it was.
Right.
It might still work though, because she's happy to get married on whatever pruta she's got there.
Right. So like it's not making a very big claim, it's making the claim specifically if you have this case. Yeah, but yeah, exactly. Ushma mina ma'ot ba'alma chozrim. And this means that that if it ma'ot ba'alma chozrim refers to if the kiddushin does not go through, then if I try to be mekadesh someone on something and the kiddushin doesn't happen, then the question is that a gift, or does that person then owe that to me? And the answer is they owe it, because you might say it's sort of a bit of a circular reasoning, but you would say if the first date had been, we say that we have concluded that it's a milveh, because, and therefore, which means that it should go, it's still owned by the person who was trying to be by the man, and therefore if the and which means because if we didn't say ma'ot ba'alma chozrim, then that would be a gift, and then that could count in the kiddushin. I think it's a circular argument, but I don't want to focus on it. But yeah, questions on that or any of this? That's the Gemara we're going to look at. So yeah, going back, questions on the whole thing. Is it clear? So, okay, does anyone want to, I think Rav Nachum, you were starting to do this. Does anyone want to, so it was questions for clarity, and now like kushiyot on the Gemara, like where they're doing something to the Mishnah, and if no one else wants to, I want to defend the Mishnah in the face of the
Let me just, let me say a comment, which is that I think that all they're doing, if you take the last shot, the second explanation, Rav Ami, then all they're doing is saying that
that
the
you're
Haita
saying-
Ochelet, when it says Haita Ochelet Rishona Rishona Eno Mikudeshet Ad Sheyeh Ba'achat Mehen, it's not really Achat Mehen, it's just the last one, because, in other words,
Correct.
really what this Gimel is actually saying two things. Like, because it's also saying not if there isn't in the last one, she's not Mikudeshet.
Right.
And if there is in the last one, then there is Mikudeshet. And that makes sense because, why does that make sense? I think that makes sense because of all the things we said. Well, how could it be that if the first one had a pruta in it, and then because the simple reading of the Gimel is that if the first one had a pruta in it and the last ones didn't, then she'd still be Mikudeshet. And that seems problematic to our halachic minds because we would say, but that's not here now. That date isn't here. Right. It's already long gone. Maybe this process took weeks, him handing her thousands of dates. And that one's long gone.
So Nachum has been convinced by this.
I'm defending.
By the Gemara's read of the Mishnah. Sarah,
I'm not convinced.
Well, I'm just wondering whether you can avoid that problem by reading Gimel as referring to Aleph.
Well, we tried that.
That's yeah. So you can't.
Yeah,
so
but I guess then
that's
what
Rav
I'm
and
saying,
Shmuel, respectable Amorim. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You don't have to. Then you don't have to worry about the. Oh, but wait, what if the first one not being there by the time you get to the last one? Because actually, they're all separate things. And
Right.
even if you, I don't know. I think you could.
It's very problematic to go on the first one because the first one is saying Hitkachi Li. Each one of them has, in other words, Hitkachi Li. So there has to be in one of them an actual pruta, and the second one, and then Gimel is saying the exact same thing.
No,
if she's
but
eating them
Gimel
one by one, then there has to be in one of
might
them Sheva Pruta. Well,
no, it's telling you that
and no, but that case of Ochelet is where he also said Hitkachi Li. That's what it means to be going on the Reisha. That he also said Hitkachi Li. Well, that already serves to divide each one up into separate entities. So the eating of them. So obviously, if you eat them also, you couldn't work unless you want to say that it's giving you a chiddush that even though she ate one,
right?
Even though she ate one, and he said it still works, even if the first one was the one that had it.
Okay.
And then it would be teaching that Yudavka could get married on a milva.
That you could get married on it, yeah.
But
does anyone
right.
So the Rikvar the Raman I are still going to defend the Tanaim in the face of the Amoraim, if you'll allow me. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, just a question. Is the in Shvuot, we paskin like Rabbi Shimon?
That's a good question.
Because it seems like if you think like the Tanakama in Shvuot, then it's not so crazy to think that Gimel and Bet, Gimel is talking about Bet, but that the main thing Gimel is trying to tell you is that they're not but that Gimel still thinks that if it's not about no, never mind. Okay, that's wrong. I'm sorry.
All right. So my question on this is let's imagine this scenario. So person is giving dates and says Yitkachili bezo, and the person is receiving dates and eating them one at a time. When is she eating them relative to the zo? Because if he says Yitkachili bezo, and then she takes them and starts eating them, she's gotten all the dates. He said it all. If he says Hitkachili bezo, she eats one, bezo, she eats one, bezo, she eats one, then we can stop the film after he says Hitkachili bezo and she eats the first one. And if that first one is worth a pruta, then why do we care what happens after that? At that moment, she has already been mikudeshet.
Very good point. Excellent. Let me rephrase what you're saying, because I like to do that. Not because anyone didn't understand you, but you're saying like this: Hitkachili bezo is obviously a case where She's saying Hitkachi li bazo, and then if Gimel is talking about that, it's talking about where then she ate one. So Hitkachi li bazo, and then she ate it. Hitkachi li bazo. So why is the Gemara talking about milvas here? There's no milvas. She the first moment she took the first one, Hitkachi li bazo, and she ate the date. And then she did it again and again and again. There was this whole process of him saying Hitkachi li and her eating it. Hitkachi li, and so the Mishnah is saying if she as long as the fruit in one of them, then she's married. No, that's obvious. Well, then I would say that's pshita. I mean, we don't need that. We don't care. Once she took it in her hand, the whole chiddush. I'm answering why that's not a good shot. It's not a good shot because it's pshita. Obviously, if she said hikachili and she got the date and it was worth a pruta, obviously she's married.
No, but I mean
the whole point of eating them. The whole no, wait a second. We add one more thing. The whole issue of the eating being brought into the matter is because there had been an attempt to join those dates together.
Right.
In the linguistic statement of the man, there was an attempt to join them together, but she ruined that by eating them. Right. If there was no attempt by the man to join them together, then what do we care if she ate them?
No. There's still the attempt by the man to join them all together. But I see what you're saying.
No, in the Reisha, there's no attempt by the man. You say
no. I'm not saying it's on the Reisha. I'm not saying it's on the Reisha. It's on the Seifa.
It's on the Seifa. Well, that's what I'm saying. Oh, so that's what I was saying. That's what I'm defending.
Yeah,
it's on the Seifa.
But the question is, why does it need to, my problem with the Gemara is trying to say, what is the change that it's making? Like you said, ba'achat mihen really means ba'achona. So I can learn from this. If I don't have the Gemara and I'm just reading the Mishnah, why does it need to be by one of them? Because the act of eating them has divided them up. She never has them all in her possession at one time. But why does it matter at which point in time? Like it could have been the first one, because he said ikachili bezo and she ate one. She's already married. It's even harder, actually, if you say that only the last one is Shavei Puta.
No, because we're viewing...
Like Mishnah could just be assuming that dates are generally worth the same amount. So either each worth...
No, there's a problem with that reading. Because if a person says, I am marrying you with this car and with this house and with this ring and with this thing, then the Kiddushin only happens after the last thing that he said and gave her.
But if that,
so if she ate it, it's not there anymore.
No, so this is the conclusion that's going to be made. But here's my argument, and yeah, that's what the Ritva is going to say basically. And that's what everyone says. But
Ritva always agrees.
Imagine for me, I said hitkachili bazu, and she ate the date. If the first date is with her Shavei Puta, she's already betrothed. Why does it matter if I then add on ubezo and give her another date?
Because this is Gemara Kiddushin.
But not if there's enough, like, I guess the argument is like, there's enough, her eating it is enough of a hefsek that it becomes a separate statement.
No. Well, there's other missions
right. But she's already married, she's already betrothed.
If I say to a woman, marry me with this grain, and I start pouring the grain into her bucket.
Right.
And if she's not married to me when finally a pruta worth of grain gets into her bucket.
Why not?
She's married to me why not? Because I didn't finish the act. There must be an act of giving her.
But
this is the conclusion, but I don't.
Wouldn't the act be finished? Like, right. I think that the argument would be, when I say the first vazo and she eats it, and that's like, there's some sort of pause there.
No, because bezo is a language of joining.
But if he managed to say bezo before she eats it, then we don't have the problem.
Right, and that's why there's the Ochalet Rishona is telling you about a case where she like creates a hefsek between him saying the first bezo or the second bezo by eating the thing.
Yeah, he says bezo. It's like instead of pouring the grain into a bucket, you're pouring the grain down her throat.
But the first, like,
and you're pouring it, and as she's, and so
If
It has
all
to
he
be the
says
la-
is he kachili bazo and then she eats it, she doesn't know he's gonna say the next thing.
Yes, she does. Well,
Why?
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter
Why?
what she knows. It doesn't matter what she knows. It doesn't matter what she knows. He's
Did he AD
trying to marry her by giving her a series of objects, and that series is the kiddushin, kesef kiddushin.
But wait, so if I
And all that matters
if I
is
go
what's
and
in
say
his
to
head.
someone, eat kachili bazu and give her something, and then afterward I say, oh, what I meant was to say ubezo,
It has
ubezo,
to
and I
be
didn't say
toch
those
kedei
parts.
dibur. Here, I'll
Is-
go out on a limb and I'll say it has to be toch kedei dibur.
So wait, so yeah, so let's okay. So should we look at the sources now? But anyway, but if it's toch kedei dibur, then how does she anyway? Okay, so let's look at
I'm
it.
just
So
saying. I'm just saying that bezo. I'm just being very. I have a very mathematical mind. Or I'm putting into a structure. Bezo to me says group things together. And
but how?
her
When did
eating
he
it,
say that?
and her eating it. Why did he say that?
When did he say that?
I understand he said it. You're saying before or after she ate it?
Right.
Well, if he said it, bezo,
I think
bezo,
Yavni is
bezo,
saying that
and then she ate them one by one after he said bezo, 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 then
Doesn't
she's
matter.
married. Then that's not the case.
Right.
That's obvious. That works.
but
That
I think
obviously
that
works. Because it's already
point is that
done. The whole point of the
the point
eating
is that
is
you
that
might
it's
have the
in between.
havamina that it wouldn't work because of what's said in bet, and that's why you need gimel on this read. Because what's said in bet is as long as I say he kachili vizo uvazo whatever, then they're all mitzarfin. So you might think that that's all you need. Kamash malan that even if you the third thing comes to tell you that even if he says that lashon, if there's enough of a pause and she's eating them one at a time, that separates them.
But then
As
what? No, but what?
As
Then what? Are
if
you
he had
saying?
made the linguistic
Then as
distinction.
long as in one of them, then what are you saying? Then as
And
long
that
as
as long as in one of them, that if she eats them one at a time, no matter whether his lashon actually divides them up, if she divides them up by doing the act of eating, that would be sufficient for even if just one of them is like even I guess at least the first one, maybe not all of them, but at least the first one. If the first one's where Shaveh Pruta, she's married. That's it. Because
Okay,
there's been a hefsek basically.
I was imagining them going on a scale, like imagine a scale and he, whatever your pruta weight is, let's call
Right.
a pound, a kilogram, but it's a pruta, right? There's like a scale and she doesn't know it and he doesn't know it, but we know it, right? There's a little scale and the first date goes on the scale and then she eats it. And then the second date goes on the scale and then she eats it. And then the third date goes on the scale and then she eats it. And it's each time he's saying, you're engaged to me, you're betrothed to me with this. As soon as, we don't know how many she ate, but as soon as one of them hits the pruta level, like ding, 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 boom, she's engaged, right? I think for me, that's how I'm reading it. Is that how you're getting it, Yavni?
Yeah, it's like the pshat of the Mishnah, as opposed to
Yeah.
the Gemara. Yeah, exactly.
So you're saying like this. You're saying that if the first one is that he has language that separates them. The second one that he has language that joins them. And the third one is that she has an action that separates them again.
Right. That's
Yeah. She has
Can
an
I ask what
action that
maybe is-
separates them again, and
so that tells you that even if he joins them together, her action of separating them is effective.
but again, when is her action of separating them? Is it in between his
It's in
actions
between.
of joining them?
So like, right. Otherwise, how can she separate them? Like you
Right,
might,
it's already
like
happened.
You
Exactly.
could, there's a later achron who says like maybe they get into the achronim get into the question of like, is it the question of her taking, like if he says bezo and then afterwards she takes one and eats it, have the others come into her possession because she's taken the one, or does she have to take all three before
That's a side point. That's also an interesting question. That's not, I don't think it's relevant.
Right.
Can I ask what might seem like a very strange question? Is the whole concept of shovi absolute, or can it be relative? Because I'm thinking as soon as she eats one, for her it is shaveh pruta. She ate it. She wanted it. She got something out of it.
That's
the Gemara.
That gives it its own shovi.
That's what Rav and Shmuel are coming to.
That's the Gemara that says the Kariv Hanaihu.
Right,
That
that's
the
the
Hana
second.
is very close.
And Rav and Shmuel are saying no. It is an absolute thing. They're answering it that it's an absolute thing, that it doesn't matter what the value
Does
is.
anyone say that she's eating them because she's hungry and not because she wants to marry him? I really wanted someone to say
Not
that.
in this context. That's in the other.
It would actually be a great time
Okay.
saver under the chuppah instead of with the whole ring. Just give her 3 dates. She's hungry. She hasn't eaten all day. She'll eat
All
something
right.
under the chuppah. And
I'm
she'll
moving
make
us on
stuff.
to the Ritva. The Ritva says, similar to what Rav Nachum says, "Va'amai heimil vehi daha kevan delo gamre kiddushe havala milve kach הנוסחה בקצת הספרים, sorry, והכי פירושו דכיוון דאבד כללה אין דעתו שיגמרו הקידושין עד שיפסיק לשונו והגיעו כולם לידה. His intention is not that the kiddushin should happen until they all get into her hand. And I think this is sort of the first case where, like, we saw this sort of in the case of like the thing that Lexi taught us about the thing being thrown. If she doesn't want to get engaged in the act of throwing, even if she wants to get engaged, then maybe betrothed, then maybe it doesn't work. So this is a sort of parallel case where even though he clearly wants to do the betrothal and, you know, and it clearly happens in a way like it is a shaveh pruta, even though his intention, because his intention was that it be on the whole thing. That's I guess the argument. But then is it a problem when, then why do we have the case where, then why on a milven a pruta does it work? Like we assume that his intention is also on the pruta when he says itkachili b'malve uba
Wait,
pruta.
finish. You got to finish that Ritva.
Okay.
I mean, I prefer you to finish that Ritva.
This is just explaining the situation that we've been discussing. This is just explaining the same, that because she ate the first one, it becomes a pikadon by her.
No, even if she didn't eat it. Even if she didn't eat it, it's a pikadon still. That's the point.
Okay.
It's still in her hand, but
yeah,
there's no
the
kiddushin yet.
There's no kiddushin until he's
until the
finished.
end. So it's just sitting there as a pikadon.
Right. But if he says anyway, and because she's taken the pikadon, then it becomes to Rita Vida Milven, and it becomes to her as if it's been loaned to her. Gaba v'chi matukulu liada, and once they all get to her hand, degamre kiddushay kamaita milve, and by that happens, it's become loaned by her. V'im ken hechi mikadcha, and if so, how can she be mikudeshet ba? Because
he's explaining the Gemara. He's explaining the Gemara. That's why the Gemara says it has to be.
I agree. Yes, now Gemara is working. I just think it's not the simplest read of the Mishnah. I think the Tanaim did not necessarily intend this. That's all I'm saying.
No, I don't agree, but okay.
The Darchei Moshe says, "V'zeh lashon Rabbeinu Yerucham." חלק א', נתיב כ"ב, וכתב הרמה, הדקי אכלה ראשונות. Oh, sorry, does someone else want to read? I'm telling you I'm reading.
You're doing great.
הדקי אכלה ראשונות אינה מקודשת. So this is these words, this case where she ate the first ones, even if the first ones were shavei pruta, אינה מקודשת. הני מילי דלא אפסיק בין חדה לחברתה שיעור דאיקה למיכה של המוחה. This is the case where he does not stop between one and the next enough time that you might think that he changed his mind. If he stopped in between, then that's the decision.
That's what I was saying about. That's what I was saying about like toch kedei dibur.
Right. Because we prove from the because based on the fact that he said it one after another very quickly, that from the beginning of his statement, his intention was always on the last of the dates, or like all of the dates together. אבל היכא דאפסיק בין חדה לחברתה שיעור דאיקה למיכה של המלוכה לא מבאי כדי דיבור, דאיקה למיכה שתבאיקרא היה בדעתו לקדשה בראשונה לבד, דקדשה בראשונה לבד. But in the case where he does pause, even just enough that he could change his mind, not even enough time, like we don't even require enough time for him to say a simple statement, then we might have the doubt that we might consider that from the beginning his intention was to betroth her with the first one. And he said, she took it, she ate it.
This is an interesting question. If a man says Harayat Mikudeshitli and puts the ring on her finger, and then all of a sudden says, I can't go through with it, and takes the ring back.
Right.
I don't know if it ever happened, but I could imagine it happening. According to this, well, might be too late, right? He did it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's right. That's exactly why.
In other words,
that's I think
he changed his mind here. Here, the changing of
mind
mind means that he decided he wants to marry her on just one of them.
Right, and he changed his mind and added the other ones. But from the beginning, his intention was to betroth her on the one, and that happened. Whether or not he changed his mind in the next moment that he wanted to add more dates to the betrothal.
That clearly has to be a fluid event.
Right. Ella afilu lo hifsik kedei dibur. Ella afilu lo hifsik kedei dibur ifseki. Even if it's not kedei dibur, even if it's just that he could change his mind. The kai malan bekidushin toch kedei dibur lav kedibur tame. So this is an answer to your question. In kiddushin, we don't say, in other things, we might say that toch kedei dibur is like dibur. So if you say something, if you make an agreement and then you have it within the time to say, actually, I take it back, then that's as if you never said the first statement. You have a little bit of buffer to take it back. With kiddushin, we don't say that. That's what it says in the David. That's the answer to your question. Hilkach, im yesh. באחת שווה פרוטה, לא שנה בקמייתא, לא שנה בבטרייתא, עד כאן לשונו. So therefore we say that if in one of them, like the pshat of the Mishnah, if in one of them...
No, but that's not the Mishnah. That's not the Mishnah. That's a possible case where the Mishnah is not talking about it. The Mishnah is talking about where he didn't hesitate.
I'm going to move on. I disagree. I think it's a reasonable read of the Mishnah that they're like, you could that could have been the Ukimta. You could have said, oh, unless he says
I'm just saying, I don't think Rabbeinu Yerucham is trying to explain the Mishnah. He's just telling you another din.
Fine. Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's a din that brings us back to what is like it.
You could say that's what the Mishnah is saying. I understand.
It fairly erases the Ukimta of the Gemara, except in a limited case. וכתב עוד במקום דאמר בזו ובזו דאמרינן אם אין באחרונה שווה פרוטה שאינה מקודשת לרי. So wait, I'm going to stop here and just point out that it's nice on the Mishnah, but it's less nice. The reason why it's sort of awkward on the Gemara and why I still think is because then what it means is it has to be fast enough that he couldn't have had a second thought in between bezo, but at the same time she has to be eating them fast, like in between, like there has to be enough time for her to eat it and not enough time for him to have a second thought.
Right, that's the case of the Mishnah, where he's doing it quickly and she's quickly eating them.
Right, but it has to. It's fast
but
enough
if it would be
have a second thought. That's how quickly he's saying it, and but there's enough time in between bezo that she.
Now, there's Rabbeinu Yerucham is saying if he would say bezo and then she eats it, and then he would say bezo and then she would eat it. And he would say, then she'd be Mikudeshet on any one of them, as long as any one of them had.
Exactly. But otherwise, how does she have time to eat it? Like, it does take time to eat a date.
They're pitted dates.
Thanks. Exactly. Anyway, so that's where I feel like this is sort of the most like in conflict with my intuition in some ways. Is this like, what is the, is this happening quickly, or like is this happening quickly or slowly? And so, not really to answer this, but I thought it. So, but like maybe this will give some insight into this question. Professor Lin Kay has a book about time in Chazal, and I'm not going to read through all of it, but but just to pick out these lines, she says basically the time, our understanding of time as like a linear flow where things happen is not necessarily how Chazal thinks about time. And it's more like temporality can be conceived as configurations of events in spatial relation to one another. So there's the event of him saying these things, and there's the event of her eating them, and we have these both, and we can play with them in terms of what we're thinking about this case is, even if like I can't imagine the situation where it really works. Legal and narrative temporalities can make past events present. They can make adjacent two or more actions that are distant from each other in natural time. The imaginative layers of temporality make legal categories more adaptive. So because we can have this flexibility in how we think about time, therefore we can we can entertain more cases and explore more possibilities within the framework of the legal thinking that we're building, rather than having to construct an actual narrative where this makes sense. We can say like, what happens if he says it this way and she says it and she does it this way, and still explore that legal possibility, even if it's not a physical possibility.
Going to bring us to the
Shulchan
halacha.
Aruch. Yeah, the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch are similar. They each do slightly different things to clarify it. Does someone want to read the Shulchan
Wait, can
Aruch
you move it a little bit more to the left?
this way?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, can you see both of them?
I can read.
Ella,
You want Shulchan Aruch?
yeah, please.
האומר לאישה, התקדשי לי בתמרה זו, התקדשי לי בזו, התקדשי לי בזו, אם יש באחת מהן שווה פרוטה, הרי זו מקודשת, ואם לאו, אינה מקודשת, אלא מספק, שמא תשווה תמרה אחת פרוטה במקום אחר. Right, so it's just each one saying that like it's safek, maybe if none of them, same thing we done. אם אמר לה, הקדשי לי בזו, 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 כולן מצטרפות, אם יש בכולן שווה פרוטה, מקודשת, ואם לאו, אינה מקודשת, אלא מספק. הייתה אוכלת ראשונה, אם יש באחרונה שווה פרוטה, מקודשת, ואם לאו, אינה מקודשת, אלא מספק, שאותם תמרים שאכלה, הרי הן כמלווה, ומקדש במלווה אינה מקודשת, ונמצא שאין קידושין אלא בתמרה האחרונה. Right. That when she eats them one by one, if the last one doesn't have a shavet pruta, then she's only safek mekudeshet because the ones she's already eaten are like alone. And so the last one is what it all is really talui on. And so if it's not shavet pruta, then the only thing that there is alone. The only thing that's shavet pruta is alone, and we can't be mekadesh with alone.
Great. We can add in Rabbeinu Yerucham's proviso that this is all talking about where he's doing it in a relatively quick pace.
Right. And she's doing it at an even quicker pace.
And she's doing it at an equally quick pace, yes.
And so I couldn't. So I don't have I wanted to bring some realia into this, and I don't have a case where something like this really happened, but sort of playing with these ideas of the issues of delays within the system, and like what happens when there's like when the kiddushin process is spread out over time and something else happens in the middle. Glickel of Hamel in her memoirs writes about various different betrothal processes, and several of them have this sort of case where there's like a betrothal and then something goes awry in between the betrothal and the marriage. And one of them was that I found was particularly like relevant also to other issues that we're talking about in terms of value and so on. So does someone want to read this? So this is from, I should have said, this is from like the turn of the 17th century Germany.
So I could, if it's in English, I'll be willing to read it. Next came a daughter, Yenta. When she was very young, she was betrothed to the son of Reb Sussman Gans.
She's talking about her in-laws' family. Sorry. So the next came a daughter. This is her husband's sister.
Yeah.
Who
lived in Minden on the Weser. He at that time was reputed to be worth 100,000 taler. It was while my father-in-law and Sussman Gans were drinking that the match was settled. That's like Tevye, Fiddler on the Roof. But the following day, when Sussman Gans was sober, he regretted the arrangement. But my father-in-law, being an important person, and as what had been agreed upon could not be altered, things remained as they were. The betrothed pair being still very young, the bridegroom was sent to study in Poland shortly after Sussman Gans died, and nothing came of his vast wealth. His wife married again, a man of the name of Feibush. After some years, the bridegroom returned from Poland, and instead of several thousand, he had only a few hundred thaler. My father-in-law wished to break off the match, but my mother-in-law would not allow an orphan to be so shamed. So the couple married and lived for a time in Minden. That's very interesting. Now, this is talking about Tanaim, really. The Tanaim were broken in a sense, maybe not
They
intentionally.
weren't, but they almost were. They thought they might be.
Well, it's not clear whether the 100,000 was
Right.
actually
Oh, that's right.
promised or it was just, imagined.
Right.
So how are you connecting this to our
So
Gemara?
the connection I felt was in the sort of risks or confusions that can come in when there is like a marriage process or a betrothal process that happens over time where something can change in the middle, right? So we have these dates, they're worth a shevei puta, but while I'm in the process of giving the dates, some of them get eaten.
Mm-hmm.
That changes things. Similarly, this is like an even more extended time of marriage where the situation of one of the parties of the marriage change. In this case, it's similarly about value, right? So we care about things being worth a puta. They were caring about the like we in the halachic thinking, they were caring about the value of each of the parties in terms of the monetary value that they bring to the marriage, and that changed in the process, and then there's it comes into a state of ambiguity and we're that brings about ambiguity. That was the connection that I made, and why this halachic thinking might be helpful for real cases, even if there isn't a real case where, like, even if you're not dealing with a real case of handing dates over and then getting it.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So can somebody offer a summary of the two things together? The two seifim that we learned together? We learned about half prutas or less than prutas, and now we're learning about creating prutas from less than prutas. And right, it seems that right. I thought the most interesting thing is that the way the Mishnah says that there has to be the unity. The Mishnah that you brought now, that there has to be that the man can either separate it by his act, connected by his act, and the woman can separate them into parts. They each have a certain power over the transaction, which is interesting. All right, thank you. I wanted to do 4 today, but we did only 2. Maybe next week we can do 4.
Shkayach.
Shkayach, everybody. Great presentations. See you next week. Or there'll be a review. Okay,
Do you have 2 minutes for after?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great, thanks.